Welcome to the introduction to week 4 here at Robert Morris University online in our course Introduction to Ethics. And yes, you are staring at pipes. There are water pipes and there are steam pipes. There are furnace flues. And these pipes take things from one place and take them to another. You've got hot water pipes and cold water pipes, all of this stuff, and it's in my basement, of course. And that's where we're starting for our metaphor for this week, in my basement among the pipes. The reason I even bring up the idea of the pipes is because I want to think about the two very different ethical theories that we're looking at are like they're two ends of the pipe, the stuff going in and the stuff going out. Let me show you this. Notice this is my copy or picture of a pipe. It says actions on it. And you notice that in the upper left-hand corner, you see the word intentions. And intentions are going in, right, to the pipe. And the pipe is where the action is, where we do the things we do, our ethics. And then you see at the other end, consequences. Let me get that word up there. There it is. Consequences. The stuff that comes out the other end of the pipe. Well, I'm using that metaphor because the two different theories that you folks are going to be examining in chapters 5 and 6 are talking about two ends of the pipe. Chapter 5 is about utilitarianism and ultimately the ethics of consequences. Utilitarians are looking to do the most good for the most people. And that is always based on the consequences of actions taken. Jeremy Bentham and J.S. Mill, John Stuart Mill, are the chief proponents that are examined in this world of utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham was John Stuart Mill's godfather. Yeah, J.S. Mill was Bentham's godson. And Jeremy Bentham had a peculiar take on utilitarianism. He was looking at it from the point of view of pleasure, hedonism, which actually was a very ancient Greek philosophical point of view. The hedonists were people who believed that the sum total of pleasure in life was the quality of happiness. Happiness was defined by the sum total of pleasures achieved in one's lifetime. In a way, Bentham revives this formula and applies it into his 18th century, early 19th century world in England, and begins to look at the ways in which people can gain a measure of happiness and satisfaction in life, given the circumstances of life. His godson, J.S. Mill, was not in agreement with Bentham's primary motive for qualifying happiness. He felt that happiness was a bigger, broader thing. One could argue that even pigs slopping in the trough are satisfied. We're not pigs, we're human beings, and we have a higher, greater potential. And so for J.S. Mill, it was much more about happiness as a defined quality of existence that included for instance, among things, education. The ability to be so enlightened that one can be raised up out of his or her dire circumstances and given a better quality of life. And so he fundamentally disagreed with his godfather about how happiness should be calculated, what the actual definition of it was. Nevertheless, Bentham argued that you could calculate, through what he called the hedonistic calculus, the quality of happiness. Now, you have these utilitarians that are looking at the consequences, what comes out the other end of the pipe. However, at the other end, where things enter into the pipe, is a person by the name of Immanuel Kant. And he argued what is become known as deontology, duty theory. And Kant, living in the 18th century that he did, he was very optimistic about the ability of our rationality to solve our problems. And so he believed that we simply had to be rational beings, taking upon ourselves the mantle that is given to us as humans by virtue of our being autonomous individuals, that is, self-law giving individuals, with the capacity to reason, that we were able then to make good decisions. And if you know the good, you will do the good. Well, his rational 18th century world perhaps is a bit different than what we perceive in the 21st century. After all, the Germans in the Nazi Empire had a rational world, so they thought. And by that rational world, they were systematically able to exterminate upwards of 8-10 million people, 7 million of which were Jews. And the solution to the Jewish problem in Nazi Germany became known as the Einschlosse, the end solution, which was the systematic execution of millions of innocent lives. And they were able to do that on some kind of a rational understanding, a rationalization based on some qualities that they discerned were good and true for Germany. Now, we can look at that and know that it's heinous, that it is evil. But we have a different perspective. We have the perspective of history, looking back. Kant didn't have that when he was writing about his own sense of our ability to be self-governing in the 18th century. So keep that in mind as you read these people. Now, as we look at the work in front of us, we're going to look at a couple of examples of both the consequences and the intentions that we bring to our ethical actions. And one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is look at a couple of clips from a documentary called The Fog of War. And it's an interview with Robert S. McNamara in his time as both the Secretary of the Department of Defense under John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson, and also his time as a member of General Curtis LeMay's staff, who was the general in charge of the aerial bombing of Japan during the Second World War. And he has some things that he's learned, lessons he's learned about value. And ultimately then what we are doing and why we do what we do, and raising questions about that, ethical and moral questions. So I want you to look at those clips and then jump into the discussion. There's also an exercise that comes out of that packet of materials, The Fog of War, that I want you to do as an exercise where you become the person that's in charge of in a defense situation, determining what the targets are going to be in a wartime scenario. And what's your rationale? What kind of calculus do you use to measure the good that you're going to do in this? And so I want you to do that as a follow-up exercise, as a way to put into concrete form the struggles that we have about what is doing the most good for the most people. What are our intentions as we go into a particular action? All that's on the table this week. The other thing is to be looking at the idea of value. And certainly war is always a calculation. There's always a calculus to war. There's always a valuation in war, assessing and assigning value to things. Some of those decisions are horrible. Some of those decisions are truly difficult morally. So hopefully we can be thinking about some of that as we look through this material from both ends of the pipe. Let me also say this. We're going to be looking at two forms of value, instrumental value and intrinsic value. Instrumental value is the value that become the means to an end. Have you ever been in a relationship where you believed you were being used by someone to get to somebody else? They weren't necessarily interested in you. You were simply a means to an end. At that point, sorry to say, you were a tool. You've heard that expression, no, so-and-so, he's a tool. Meaning that you serve an instrumental value only. You do not have value in yourself for yourself. Immanuel Kant argued that we ought to be making a kingdom of ends. That is to say that all of us are intrinsically valuable. Why? Because we have value simply by being, simply by showing up, we have value to one another. And therefore, we ought to be valuing each other in those terms as intrinsically worth it, not instrumental tools. So we'll be looking at that. Finally, I want you to be thinking about next week you have your paper due. It's the second paper. It's an important look at an individual situation, circumstance, either from a family relationship or from a workplace scenario or maybe a team scenario where you were part of an ethical dilemma or problem. Something happened, an event. And you're going to evaluate that event for what it was, try to describe it, but also then to analyze that event. What were the kinds of things that were happening? What were some of the ethical applications being made that made this event what it was? And then ultimately, how was that event solved? Was it solved? Were you the decision maker? Were you able to make the decision of how it was resolved? Or was it out of your hands because you were just a cog in the big machine? And if you had been a decision maker or could have made a decision, would you have done it differently? So look through the instructions for that second paper because actually it platforms and ramps up into the final paper, which is a bigger view of your life story. How then shall I live? This is one instance of how I have lived, right? This paper number 2. Paper number 3 is the big enchilada. That's the final paper. So be looking for that as well. So we look at the pipes, where they go to, where they come from, what we put into them, what comes out of them. And so the view from the basement is a view of our intentions and also the consequences of our actions. And I welcome you to week 4. Take care, and we'll see you later.